Welcome to In the Hot Seat with the Tenney Group. I'm Spencer Tenney. It's good to be with you. Having questions about culture? Well, my next guest literally wrote the book on company culture. With me in the hot seat today, we have author and industry expert Brian Fielkow. Welcome to the hot seat.
Thanks, Spencer. It's great to be with you.
Well, before we heat things up a little bit, why don't you just tell us a little bit about what you're working on presently, and then we'll jump right in.
I'm currently serving Acrisure as its Executive Vice President of Risk Resources. Acrisure is the fifth largest insurance broker in the country. They're a fintech. And what we're doing is we're helping clients develop ways to better manage risk and take control of their insurance costs. I've been doing this, Spencer, for about a year, and it's really been a great experience.
All right. So we're going to jump in right there. Now, you and I just were recently at a conference and we were saying, how in the world have we not crossed paths before? Because if anyone was ever on the speaking circuit, it was Brian. And so for context, CEO of Jetco Delivery, sold your business. You've done all kinds of things. You've been an author. You're doing so. Just want to give a little context for some of the things that we're going to talk about. But I want to go back to, you're clearly passionate about safety. Like, where does that come from?
Spencer, safety to me it's the right thing to do. Obviously, I mean, to me, it's a moral imperative to run a safe company, but it's also very good business. You know, people that think safety is expensive, I'd consider them to look at the cost of the opposite, being not safe. To me, if you're running a safe business, that's the cornerstone of operational excellence. If your business is running safely, you're probably running well operationally too. You have people, Spencer, that think that, well, you know, safety and operations or safety and productivity compete for each other. Nothing could be further from the truth. If you can lay the foundation with safety and get safety right, a lot of the rest of the metrics and results are they fall in place. And, you know, maybe when I first bought Jetco all those years ago, I would talk to customers about our safety culture and our processes. And a lot of them, you know, the eyes would glaze over and they'd say, get to the part about the price. I'm busy. Mm-hmm. But toward my last, you know, part-time owning and operating and leading Jetco, completely the opposite. We had customers in every month auditing us. Customers care about safety. It's a way to differentiate yourself.
No, I think that's wonderful. There was a story that you just told just a matter of weeks ago, and it was about a leader of a company that had a great impact on you, that talked about the connection between safety and culture. Do you remember the story that I'm mentioning?
Yeah, that's one of my favorites. It's goes way back to 1987 when Paul Allen took over as the CEO of Alcoa. You know, Mr. Allen went on to become the Secretary of Treasury under George W. Bush. So he had a distinguished career. But when he first got to Alcoa, he had a meeting with his, with the investor community, and he started talking about safety and said, if you want to know how we're doing, look at our safety numbers. And people in the investment community panicked. It's like, this guy's crazy. You know, I want to know about inventory and turns and margins. And he led with a safety first approach. And, you know, certainly, I think it's the most famous, deservedly so, example of how safety is a hardcore business proposition. You can go look at Alcoa's performance under his leadership, and it went right to the bottom line. And, you know, he worked, obviously, Alcoa is in a very high hazard industry. You got to get it right. And you can't accept injuries and crashes, you know, as the cost of doing business. You have to have, as a leader of a high hazard industry, a high hazard business, you have to have a zero mindset.
No, and I remember, and I love that obviously, I mean, what is that, 25 years ago? And here it is impacting you in Jetco and then in multiple ventures since then. So maybe share a little bit about, like, when you purchased Jetco, how did that specific experience or that encounter how did it affect the way that you led in that culture?
Well, by the time I bought Jetco, so we're going to turn the clock back to 2006. I'll turn it back even further. I began my career practicing corporate law. So I advised a lot of clients, primarily middle market entrepreneurial. Went to work for my favorite client. This is up in Milwaukee. We were in the recycling business, so paper recycling. We sold that to Waste Management. I worked at Waste for a couple of years before buying Jetco. And through my time in the recycling business and my time at Waste, I was at Waste when leadership really took it on, in my opinion, a worst to first safety journey. I mean, they were really struggling, but with a new CEO, new leadership, new safety professionals, they turned that company around. And just watching how it was done, I really thought to myself, okay, I understand this. I sort of understand what drives it, and if I was ever given the chance to, own a business, I was going to run that playbook. And the playbook really is focused on internal strength. It's not just safety, right? Safety is a major component, but the theory is strong on the inside. Take care of your people. You become unbeatable on the outside.
No, that's pretty good. So strong on the inside, outside. What were some other elements of that outside of safety?
Well, for example, like we never viewed safety as a department. We never had a safety committee because that sort of segregates safety. Our philosophy is it's just woven into the operation. So we had a safety, we had a driver committee, but they weren't just focused on safety. They were focused on every aspect of the life of a driver in our company. And strategies like that were done to promote engagement, to understand that, if we're busy, our drivers are never there, and that physical separation can break engagement. So we figured out ways to create a culture where our drivers were treated well, financially, yes, but it has to go beyond the money. And we really brought them into the operation. And again, that's where it went beyond safety. So, and then operations, for example, our operations leaders were accountable for safety metrics. It wasn't like, well, the safety manager is responsible for that. I mean, it has to rest with operations. So we took a very holistic approach as opposed to operations is here, finance is there, sales are here, safety is there. We broke down those silos that often, I think, divide quote unquote departments and impede performance ultimately.
So, Brian, we were recently at a conference and we were on this panel and talking about maximizing value, especially in a very challenging market. And one of the things that we talked about, reducing customer concentration. We also talked about reducing owner dependence. That's just one of many concepts and areas to create value. When you were going through your process of selling Jetco delivery, what were some of the things that you saw as major areas that you wanted to address as part of prepping for a sale?
Well, the company that bought Jetco called the GTI Group, and they're backed by private equity. The PE firm is called NovaCap. So we were dealing with a very sophisticated seller, and I anticipated that way before I even met them. Because I think you have to show up. Well, I don't want to say have to, because really every company has its own choice. But I made a choice to kind of show up running the business as if we were a public company, or as if we were going to sell, and anticipating what does a buyer want to look at? Because whether or not we ever sold, what a buyer wants to look at, a lot of times in and of itself, is the driver of value. And this is all about creating value. Again, whether you're going to sell or pass it on for generations, whatever you want to do. So I tried to be careful to not run it as a lifestyle business. And if we had excess expenses, which we did, we would make sure they were segregated so that we could look at the P&L and say, okay, these things over here, we understand what they are. but from my standpoint, customer concentration and the world revolving around the owner, neither of them worked for me. So I watched, one of my North Star metrics was in fact customer concentration. Um, the most concentrated we ever were, I think, might have been the top customer being, I don't know, 4 or 5%, the top five, 15, 18%. Sometimes, depending on the market, it might swing a little bit. But the key is that, you know, people change, customers change. And if you have too many eggs in one basket, I think it could really hurt you, because you're investing in that business every day. Now, some people have businesses where there's only going to be 2 or 3 customers because of the nature of what they do, and that's why I'm not coming with any judgment, because that may work very well for some business models. But our business model, for example, Spencer, we ran intermodal, dry van, heavy haul, flatbed. We had a brokerage company. All of that was designed to get deep into the markets we served, but to diversify. And as far as ownership concentration, there's a lot of reasons besides value creation that you can't have the business revolve around you as the owner. In my mind, something could happen to you, right? I mean, you could have a health issue. There could be things out of your control, not related to a sale. And the company gets to a certain size where you have to have that team developed. It also sort of lets you live the life a little more that you want. And let's face it, if you're a buyer and the buyer sees the whole world revolving around just the owner, I don't know, if I was buying a business, I would be very skittish about that.
Yeah, 100%. We often kind of frame this as, are you comfortable with a potential investor framing your business as a job versus as a business? Because without reducing owner dependence, that's effectively what the value proposition is, and nobody wants a job. They have a job. So, so well said. So you go on and you exit. What advice? I think there's some assumptions about transacting with private equity groups. Some are fair, some are just lack of experience. But I'm curious, what could you share with our network about your experiencing, and then what advice would you give to folks to help better prepare for that process?
Well, because you've heard the same thing. You've got some people who are just out there, even posting on like LinkedIn, just that they're so allergic to private equity groups, and I think that's a mistake. Our outcome with the NovaCap group and GTI was very good. Now look, if you want things to be just the same and not change, then don't sell. Right. So there were flashpoints. There were areas where there was disagreement, but all in all, I think that they made us better. We learned a lot working with them. We grew the business significantly working with them. We diversified our risk that much more. And there was a big part of me that wanted to be sure that our employees were taken care of, and we're 4.5 years into it. And I can absolutely say they were. So kind of having a better funded, larger organization, I thought was in the best interest of our employees. And I think that proved right. But I think the people that think, okay, they're going to buy me and they like me so much, they're going to just let me do what I used to do, that's fantasy land. I mean, you have to, as the potential seller, you got to interview the buyer. And like if it's a PE company, you interview executives at other portfolio companies that the PE company owns or used to own. And you got to make up your own mind and trust your own eyes, because again, it's not one size fits all. But if you spend your time on the cultural fit, what you're going into, the odds, I think, increase dramatically of a good result.
So Brian, I want to get in and talk about your book, but before we do that, I'm just very interested. Who are some leaders, business or otherwise, that have influenced the way that you think about culture and maybe even influenced this book?
Well, it would definitely start growing up in Appleton, Wisconsin, in retail. My parents both had retail stores, and I worked from probably age 8, selling electronics, TVs and stereos and stuff. And so I always saw how my dad treated his team, right? And that was kind of the first really look I got was, you take care of your team, they'll take care of you. Um, and then in the recycling company that I worked at after practicing law, I saw the same thing. I really learned there, you can be tough on the issues, brutally tough on the issues, but treat your people with respect and dignity. And I think that kind of entrepreneurial leadership, bottom line focused, but people focused also. It wasn't like, oh well, we had a bad month or a bad quarter, so let's fire 10% of our people. You get through those challenges together, and so some of the lessons I learned in earlier business experience, those are some of the plays from the playbook that I ran at Jetco. And we saw it in turnover, right? Our turnover was way below the industry average. We saw it in recruiting, and that happy employees recruit other happy employees. But all of it stemmed, I think, from treating people the right way. If I think about like maybe not so much a business leader, but an author that I'd recommend, anything Patrick Lencioni writes, I love. My favorite book that he wrote is called The Advantage, and I liked it because it was a amalgamation of his other books. It was a greatest hits album, if you will. But his focus is heavily on culture, on what causes teamwork to break down, on why is there so much job misery out there, and how do you combat it. And those to me are the ingredients. Whatever industry you're in, you get that part right, and then all the challenges that your competition or the market throw at you, you can overcome.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good word. So a lot of people think about writing a book, Brian, but you actually did it. So I'm curious, what was the turning point where you knew you had all of this experience and this knowledge? You knew there was a direct market that where people appreciated what you'd done in that space. Like, but what was the turning point where ideas turned to action?
Well, I wrote 2 books. One called Driving to Perfection, about company culture, and one more specifically about safety culture. I co-wrote it with Jim Schultz, who was the SVP of safety at Waste Management.
Mm-hmm.
Leading People Safely is the name of that book. And a lot of the themes there's overlap on the themes, because again, what goes into a healthy company culture is the same thing that goes into a healthy safety culture. And the business books I've read or still read, I enjoy them, but a lot of them are written from the perspective, for example, of a consultant or of a Fortune 100 CEO.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to write it from more of an entrepreneur standpoint. So, more from the standpoint of here's how to get things done without spending a lot of money. Practical, hands-on ideas. So my books focus more on the tactics than maybe some of the things that you'll see out there, and that was by design, because again, well, I hope multiple people, multiple companies read the book. My audience really is the leader and the manager of that privately held entrepreneurial company, where it's like, we're not going to get on the corporate jet, tomorrow. It's we're gonna figure this out with the hand that we're dealt.
No, and I know that that's an approach that I know our peers in the trucking logistics space will greatly appreciate as they continue to lean in and get value from this book. So now, I joked about you being a pretty serious free agent pickup for Acrisure here, and the relative recent picture. And in this presentation that you recently made at one of their seminars, one of the things that you said that resonated with me was about the need, especially in this reptilian environment right now, from a risk standpoint, to treat all small claims as if they are big claims. Why is that important?
Yeah, I was I was really excited to join Acrisure, and that relationship came from a lot of the speaking and the consulting I've done, which I was sort of doing in parallel with the years I owned and ran Jetco. But I see too much. I see too much money flying out the door because people aren't being as aggressive as they need to be about claims. I mean, I think we know that we live in a very litigious world, and that even when you're, even when you're right, you might be wrong when it comes to,
Right.
claims. So what we talked about, what you referred to, Spencer, was the idea that, whether or not an injury or a crash has a severe outcome is a matter of luck, right? In other words, nothing more, nothing less. I mean, you can back into a pole 100 times, and then at 101st time, it's going to be a person you backed into.
Mm.
So I don't look at the magnitude of the outcome. I look at the behavior, because even if the behavior just resulted in, we'll stay in trucking, torn up grass, or maybe a little repair to a fence, it's what it could have been. Because if you can focus on the behaviors, whether it's distraction, not getting out and looking, speeding, whatever the behaviors are, the more you can focus on the behaviors, the more you can hopefully, choke off the possibility of severity. But the problem is, if you overlook all the ones that are quote unquote minor, you're never going to build that organizational intelligence, and then all of a sudden you're going to have the big one. And honestly, most big crashes are the culmination
Mm.
the culmination of a lot of things that went unrecognized, unremedied, unaddressed, because nothing happened or nothing major happened. So that's why I focus so hard on, you got to look at them all and treat them all. It doesn't mean you have to be all, formal about it, but you've got to coach and do remedial training and help build your people to build that culture of prevention. But if all you do is focus on when somebody's seriously injured or has the potential to be, you're just going to be a firefighter. You're just going to be good cleaning up the mess, putting out the fire. You're never going to be good at preventing the fire.
Or it's just game over and it's done. So, no, that's some excellent advice right there, sir. So, help me kind of bridge the gap on the connection between all the things that we're talking about and this one thing that both me, you, and Jack Porter kept coming back to, which was, if you want to have a company worth owning, you need to build it to sell. And there's multiple benefits of that, and you've experienced that firsthand as an owner. So why should other owners build a business to sell? What are the benefits?
Well, I mean, let's say you've got owners that say, I never want to sell. I would still recommend that they understand how a buyer looks at the business, because it will make them, I think it'll give them clarity on decisions they can make, right? So I think having a seller's mentality, whether or not you're uh, going to sell, it just creates a healthier approach to the business. Look, I've been there. I mean, I've spent money on things that, if we were a public company or owned by PE, we never would have spent the money on. So, and you have to sort of sometimes hold yourself back on that. So it creates a certain rigor and discipline. In our case, with NovaCap and GTI, we weren't looking to sell. I literally got a phone call from a friend that was an investment banker at the time. He said, "Hey, I know somebody who from Canada who's looking to expand in the U.S. and their profile is exactly yours." And what he said was, "I think you should meet." And I'll always meet, because you just you can't say no if you don't know what you're saying no to. So
Right.
I met, but I was like, this probably isn't going to go anywhere, and it went somewhere. But had we not always managed our financials to what a seller would expect, for example, 4 or 5 years before we sold, we moved to audited financials. We didn't have to. Nobody made us. But we said, you know what? That will take away a lot of questions if we ever sold. or if we ever had to change banks or whatever the reason was. So all the work we did with the seller's mindset made things a lot easier, Spencer, when we actually went to sell. And again, we weren't even in the market, but that's the key, is to be an entrepreneur. You've got to be opportunistic. And when the opportunity arose, we were somewhat ready.
No, 100%. We talked about that as well, as far as almost never is it going to be the exact time when you're ready to sell going to align when the buyer's ready to pay you the most money. It just doesn't work that way. And or to your point, the right buyer that can most effectively protect your employees. Whatever the goals are, the key is you have to be opportunistic, as you said, in order to have a chance to fully realize all that you've created. So I've got one last question for you, Brian, a little bit of a wild card. Now, I'm truly interested in 8-year-old Brian building these electronics and doing whatever you were doing. And I'm wondering, having all that you've experienced, multiple different career points as an attorney, entrepreneur, risk management, doing all different things I don't even know about, what advice would you give to 8-year-old Brian as he thinks about what it takes to be a good business person? What advice would you give that same young man?
Man, I love that question. A lot of it's personal too, because when I was talking about the retail business, right? 8-track tape decks and cassette tape decks. That's my dad's business, was the TV appliance furniture, and so he passed away when he was 51. So here I am, a lot older than that now, and 51, was young then, and now it's really young. So I think what I would tell the 8-year-old would be to enjoy the ride, and we went through, because trucking and logistics were cyclical, we went through some troughs, and maybe learn how to deal with those troughs a little better. I would definitely kind of, give the 8-year-old Brian, you should definitely just be a little, focus a little more on personal resilience, which I learned over the years, but that did not come naturally. I was a history major in college. I would do that all over again, but I would tell the 8-year-old Brian, take some courses on industrial psychology. It will serve you very well in the future. So I think we all get our amateur degrees in that when we're in the real world. But it's also sort of to follow your dreams, and don't worry if you don't fit in somebody else's mold, because their mold doesn't matter. I've had a very eclectic career. I've driven in many lanes, maybe too many, and I loved every minute of it, but it doesn't necessarily fit the mold, and I would have it no other way. So those are some of the things I'd probably tell the 8-year-old. I appreciate you asking me. I've never thought about that. I love that question.
Well, let me just tell you, Brian, I believe you fit no mold, as I see it. So I really appreciate you spending some time with us, sharing with our network. You are a wealth of knowledge and information for our industry. That's going to do it for us in the hot seat, sir. We'll see you next time.